The paper is trying to make some descriptive claims in parts 1 through 3, and then a set of normative-ish claims in part 4. So I'm going to split up my remarks accordingly. The descriptive goals are to introduce two historical concepts, general citizenship and general citizenship rights, and to try to show how bringing these concepts into view can help illuminate some of the familiar debates about citizenship rights. And then more broadly, I'm trying to show how disagreements about citizenship rights were undergirded by differing perspectives about sovereignty and federalism. All right, so what were general citizenship and general citizenship rights? Well, right from the get-go, I'm going to face the classic problem for an intellectual historian, which is I want to say that ideas are socially constructed, so I want to resist the temptation of offering just a single stable definition. But the basic idea here is that general citizenship rights were rights that every state recognized as a matter of their own fundamental law, even though states were able to regulate those rights according to local circumstance. And this idea of general citizenship rights, a sort of commonly held set of fundamental rights, made sense back then, not just because there was a sort of common jurisprudential heritage, but also because there was a set of commonly held assumptions about fundamental rights being grounded on social contract theory. And then privileges and immunities clause is embracing the idea of general citizenship, which basically requires each state to reciprocally recognize that commonly held set of citizenship rights so that the citizens of each state aren't treated as aliens in other states. So one takeaway right off the bat here is that although Article 4 was generally viewed as a non-discrimination requirement, it was grounded on this assumption that all states had to protect a common set of fundamental rights. Another takeaway is that although general citizenship was necessarily linked to either state and or national citizenship, it was actually a different type of status. So it meant belonging to a federative league of states like the one that existed under the Articles of Confederation. And plenty of people thought that that concept survived into the Constitution. So most straightforwardly, people like Calhoun maintained that the states were fully sovereign, and so at core, the entire federal system was federative or confederal. But then plenty of people, including Randy's main man, Salmon Chase, thought that the United States was not only a nation, as reflected in Articles 1 and 2, but also a federative league of states as reflected in Article 4. So on this view, somebody could be a citizen of the United States and have accompanying rights in the sense of being a member of a unitary nation. And then somebody could be a citizen of the United States and have accompanying rights in the sense of being a member of the Federative League of States. So one of the scholarly interventions I'm trying to make here is to say that we really need to stop reading references to the rights of citizens of the United States as necessarily being references to national citizenship rights. Once we recognize the concept of general citizenship, that inference is no longer valid. So before turning to the normative points, I want to just briefly highlight the argument made in Part 3 about Bingham's design of the Privileges or Immunities Clause. And my main point here is that understanding Bingham's position in terms of general citizenship helps harmonize some of the key insights of what have previously been oppositional scholarly camps of folks in this room. So for the most part, what I'm saying here is consistent with the fundamental rights view advocated by Akil Amar, by Randy and Evan, by Chris Green, by David Upham, and so on, all of whom say that the 14th Amendment was designed to secure substantive fundamental rights, not just a non-discrimination rule and not just a set of rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights. So I think that's absolutely correct. But then viewing Bingham's project in terms of general citizenship rights also helps us take on board some of the key insights of people like John Harrison, Kurt Lash, and Alon Werman, who've rightly pointed out that Bingham was not trying to nationalize fundamental rights jurisprudence in the sense of basically converting common law rights into federal constitutional law. So viewing the privileges or immunities clause in terms of general fundamental rights offers us a way of harmonizing these different insights, basically saying people can come into federal court, try to enforce rights that states are already required to respect, but without actually nationalizing or constitutionalizing, in a sense, the rights themselves. For those of you who are familiar with Pam Brandwine's work, this will sound very familiar because I'm trying to reinforce her idea that the 14th Amendment was only securing existing rights, not creating new rights. At the same time, there's lots of Republicans in the 1860s who embraced the idea of paramount national citizenship. And in this paper, I'm not trying to say anything about which side was right. I'm just trying to show that there are these two different ways of understanding privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, and that how people understood that idea depended on their underlying conceptions of sovereignty and the nature of the Union. So for nationalists like Charles Sumner, the rights of citizens of the United States were national social contractarian rights and therefore triggered an implied or inherent national power of enforcement under the logic of Prigg. But that's not the only way of viewing these rights. There's also this older federative concept of general citizenship. So that segues into the more normative points I try to make at the end. Once again, my argument here is not at all based on having identified a correct original meaning of the Privileges or Immunities Clause. I'm trying to keep my intellectual historian hat on here, but I do want to tentatively suggest some ways that historical debates about citizenship rights might help inform some ways that originalists think about these matters, including issues of method. So the first point I want to raise is that if an interpreter today wants to credit evidence from folks in the 1860s or 1870s, the interpreter needs to be attentive to the possibility that what people were saying about some topic, rights of education, state action, what have you, very might well be grounded on some underlying assumptions about federalism and the nature of the Union. So their views on privileges or immunities are really being driven by some set of underlying social contractarian assumptions about sovereignty, federalism, and so on. So if I can sort of translate this into Larry's terminology about ambiguity and vagueness, what I might say is something like, when folks are debating the parameters of privileges or immunities of the United States, citizens of the United States, and disagreeing, their disagreements are not necessarily reflecting vagueness about the term. Rather, they actually have two different concepts in mind. And which concept they have in mind depends on how they think about the nature of the Union. The second point that I'm making is tapping into one of Jonathan Gnapp's critiques, which is that because so much of constitutional interpretation turned on underlying ideas about the nature of the Union, there really couldn't be a stable, fixed conception of the Privileges or Immunities Clause or the federal power to enforce those rights. Rather, the text is going to take on different meanings depending on one's antecedent views about the nature of the Union, which is itself not an issue, at least as a matter of the 14th Amendment, that's textually specified. So obviously, as a descriptive claim about how people thought in the past, that, like, I can't tell you that modern textualist approaches to the Constitution are wrong or something like that, but it does help show how differently folks thinking about these things in the past approached constitutional debate. So to the extent originalists want to offer a methodology that's sort of tapping into how people actually thought about these things in the past, I think this is something that needs to be addressed. Thanks.